Whispers in the stone corridors spoke of a ruler who crowned the wrong bride. A stolen scent, a forged bite, and a sister's ultimate deceit elevated a fraud. While a mortal man can be tricked in the pitch black, an ancient shadow wolf never forgets its true, destined mate. Winter winds howled through the jagged, unforgiving peaks surrounding the Rogers estate in the year 1242, carrying with them the bitter promise of a harsh season. Lord Henry Rogers, a ruthless alpha who ruled the Western Valley with an iron fist, demanded absolute perfection from his lineage. He was a man obsessed with legacy, parading his legitimate daughter Bristol Rogers before every visiting lord and dignitary. Bristol was draped in the finest silks, spun from southern merchants, her neck heavy with precious jewels, presented as the flawless pride of their pack. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but possessed a heart as cold and unyielding as the permafrost beneath their stone stronghold. Hidden away in the damp, soot-stained kitchens beneath the grand halls was Cheryl Rogers, born to a gentle servant woman who had tragically passed away during childbirth. Cheryl was the result of Lord Henry's fleeting indiscretion. She was a secret he fiercely guarded, treating his own flesh and kin as nothing more than a lowly disposable scullery maid, to avoid the shame of an illegitimate heir. Cheryl bore the immense harshness of her reality with a quiet, unbroken resilience. Her days were spent scrubbing stone floors until her knuckles bruised, finding solace only in the late moonlit hours when the abusive estate finally slept, allowing her to slip into the gardens and breathe the pine-scented air. The highly anticipated Moon Festival brought a sudden palpable tension that crackled through the Western Valley. Adrian Perry, the Alpha King of the formidable Ethelgard pack, had arrived with his royal retinue. Rumors of his prowess preceded him across the lands, a fierce, unmatched warrior, whose inner beast, the legendary creature known only as the Shadow Wolf, struck paralyzing terror into the hearts of his enemies. Adrian was seeking his Luna queen, strong enough to solidify his expanding reign and calm his increasingly restless spirit. Lord Henry saw a monumental opportunity to elevate his family's status to royalty. He explicitly ordered Cheryl to remain locked below the servant decks, commanding the guards to strike her if she showed her face, ensuring absolutely nothing would distract the king from Bristol's meticulously crafted allure. But destiny is a wild, untamable force, rarely confined by wooden doors and petty commands. As the grand feast commenced in the upper halls, suffocating Cheryl with the booming sounds of merriment, clinking goblets and roaring fires, she managed to pry open a rusted cellar grate. Desperate for a moment of peace, she escaped into the freezing, snow-dusted gardens, wrapping a frayed woolen shawl tightly around her frail shoulders. It was there, beneath the drooping branches of ancient weeping willows, that she collided with a towering, cloaked figure. Adrian had stepped away from the suffocating political flattery of the lords, seeking the quiet solitude of the night, to clear his aching head. The moment their eyes locked in the dim moonlight, the frigid air between them thickened, sparking with an invisible electric current. A visceral, undeniable pull anchored them both to the frozen earth. Adrian's eyes, usually a steely, calculating grey, flashed a brilliant, luminescent gold. His inner shadow wolf, a beast that had rejected countless noblewomen, recognized its other half instantly. Overwhelmed by the raw, intoxicating power of the fated mating bond, Adrian closed the distance between them, pulling Cheryl's trembling form against his broad chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of wild jasmine and crisp winter chill. Acting purely on ancient instinct, his fangs elongated gently, grazing the tender skin of her collarbone. He left the unmistakable crescent-shaped impression of an alpha's preliminary claim, a searing heat that bound their souls together. Adrian cupped her soot-streaked face, whispering a fierce promise against her lips, vowing to formally present her to the assembly at the midnight toast, commanding her to wait for him. Tragedy struck the moment Adrian turned back toward the glowing castle to prepare his royal announcement. Bristol, having grown bored of the lords and slipping away to spy on the king, witnessed the entire intimate exchange from a concealed stone balcony above. Consumed by a jealous rage so potent it entirely fractured her sanity, she acted with brutal, unforgiving swiftness. Accompanied by her aggressively loyal brute of a personal guard, Gregory Bristol ambushed Cheryl II. Adrian disappeared inside. Before Cheryl could even comprehend the danger, a heavy, blunt blow to the back of her head sent her plunging into total darkness. Gregory casually dragged the unconscious wounded girl into the deepest forgotten root cellar of the estate, chaining her wrists to the freezing, damp stone wall. With midnight rapidly approaching, Bristol summoned Lady Catherine, an exiled elder, versed in dark, forbidden glamour. Using Cheryl's discarded woolen shawl, Catherine brewed a pungent, potent herbal resin over a small flame. The concoction magically masked Bristol's natural scent, completely replacing it with the wild jasmine and winter chill that Adrian's wolf had imprinted upon. To complete the horrific treachery, Bristol took a searing silver blade from the elder's hands. Unflinchingly, she carved a deep crescent moon into her own collarbone, perfectly mimicking the Alpha's sacred mark, while biting down on a leather strap to muffle her screams. When the grand midnight bell chimed, Adrian stood before the roaring hearth, his royal senses heavily clouded by the overwhelming mating fever and the pungent thick wood smoke filling the hall. Bristol stepped forward into the firelight, draped in velvet, enveloped entirely in Cheryl's stolen scent, and proudly bearing the fresh raw wound on her shoulder. Blinded by primal instinct, physical fever, and the dark magic weaving heavily through the air, Adrian embraced the wrong sister, unknowingly binding his human soul to a fraud, and sealing the fate of the true hidden queen. 6 agonizing, grueling months dragged by within the towering, oppressive obsidian walls of the Ethelgard stronghold. Bristol Rogers now sat comfortably upon the grand high seat, as Queen Bristol Perry, draped in heavy silks, velvet, and absolute authority. Her very first royal decree upon arriving in the capital had been a masterclass in cruel malice, dragging Cheryl from the Western Valley to serve as her personal lowest-ranking handmaiden. Bristol desperately wanted her sister close, a constant broken reminder of her ultimate victory, and to ensure Cheryl could never escape to tell her tale. To guarantee the Alpha King never discovered his grave error, Bristol's ruthless enforcers had dragged Cheryl into the dungeons on her first night. They pressed a glowing, red-hot iron brand directly over Cheryl's collarbone, melting the original sacred claim into a jagged, unrecognizable burn scar under the public guise of a tragic, clumsy kitchen accident. Yet despite the outward opulence, the powerful kingdom of Ethelgard was rotting from the inside out. Adrian Perry, once a vibrant, commanding, and unstoppable ruler, was rapidly deteriorating into a pale, hollow shell of a man. His human mind, completely deceived by Lady Catherine's lingering toxic enchantments, genuinely believed Bristol was his fated mate. However, his inner beast, the ancient primordial shadow wolf, knew the absolute truth. The magnificent wolf vehemently rejected Bristol, violently fighting Adrian's physical attempts to consummate the marital bond. Whenever Bristol approached their royal chambers attempting to play the role of a loving wife, the king would be seized by agonizing, blinding migraines. His eyes would flash with a dangerous, untamed fury, forcing him to cast her out. The entire realm whispered nervously of the king's impending madness. The political pressure mounted heavily, as Lord Richard the Pack's stern beta constantly pressed the royal couple in council meetings for a legitimate heir. They simply could not produce. Unable to find any semblance of peace within his own fractured mind, Adrian began to experience long, terrifying blackouts. During the dead witching hours of the night, when the massive castle was entombed in heavy silence, the king's human consciousness would completely shut down. This allowed the suppressed shadow wolf to take total unyielding control of his physical form. A monstrous, pitch-black wolf, larger than any natural beast and possessing eyes like burning embers, began prowling the labyrinthine corridors of Ethelgard. The heavily armed castle guard lived in a state of sheer, unadulterated terror. Seasoned warriors would retreat, trembling into the shadows, as the massive beast stalked the stone halls, constantly sniffing the frigid air, frantically searching for a missing piece of its soul it had lost on the night of the moon festival. It was driven by a primal agony, a deep, sorrowful yearning that could not possibly be quenched by the false, perfumed queen sleeping alone in the royal bed. One bitterly cold, storm-swept evening, the shadow wolf descended past the grand halls, padding silently down the spiraling stone steps into the lowest levels of the servants' quarters. It found Cheryl, kneeling alone on the freezing flagstones, her ragged dress stained as she scrubbed thick soot from the grand culinary hearth. The terrified guards, watching from a safe distance down the hall, gripped their spears, fully expecting the legendary beast to tear the frail, exhausted maid apart in a fit of feral rage. Instead, an impossible, breathless hush fell over the cavernous room. The monstrous wolf approached Cheryl with agonizing slowness, dropping its massive, terrifying head to the dirty floor, and letting out a low, vibrating, rumbling purr that shook the dust from the ceiling. It nudged its wet, ink-black nose against her heavily bruised, overworked hands, whining softly like a lost pup. Cheryl, trembling violently with a chaotic mixture of terror and profound, overwhelming sorrow, slowly reached out. Tears streamed down her soot-stained cheeks as she buried her trembling fingers deeply into the thick midnight fur of the beast. In those quiet, stolen moments amidst the ashes, the terrifying Alpha King's soul bowed completely to the true hidden queen, finding the only tiny sliver of peace it had known in half a year. Bristol's paranoia, however, was a living, breathing monster of its own, growing more volatile by the day. When nervous whispers from the kitchen staff regarding the shadow wolf's strangely docile devotion to the scarred, mute kitchen maid reached the queen's royal chambers, her heart turned to solid ice. She instantly recognized the extreme fragility of her stolen crown. Knowing that Lady Catherine's dark enchantments were slowly but surely wearing off, Bristol decided she needed to eliminate the threat permanently. She orchestrated a deadly, foolproof plot. The highly anticipated annual winter hunt was rapidly approaching, a brutal traditional excursion into the deep, untamed, snow-laden forests of the northern reaches. Bristol conspired behind closed doors with the increasingly frustrated Lord Richard. She subtly fed the beta lies, convincing him that Cheryl was a cursed omen of bad luck, a practitioner of dark arts who was directly causing the king's mysterious illness. She arranged for the frail maid to be brought along as baggage labor, secretly planning for Cheryl to be intentionally left behind in the freezing, hostile wilderness to be torn apart by rogue, clanless wolves. But as the treacherous day of the hunt loomed closer, a miraculous, undeniable shift began to occur beneath Cheryl's high-collared, scratchy rags. Fueled by the nightly intimate proximity to her true mate's spiritual form, the powerful bond was beginning to override the physical trauma. The ugly, jagged burn scar on her collarbone began to miraculously peel away the dead skin, flaking off to slowly reveal the faint, undeniable luminescent shimmer of the Alpha King's original golden mark, pulsing with an ancient magic that could no longer be hidden in the dark. Crisp, unforgiving winds battered the royal hunting party as they marched deeper into the jagged, snow-draped expanse of the northern reaches. The towering ancient pines blocked out the pale winter sun, casting the forest floor into a permanent, eerie twilight. King Adrian rode at the vanguard on his massive warhorse, his posture rigid, his face a mask of exhausted stoicism. The dark bags beneath his eyes spoke volumes of his deteriorating health, his mind continuously waging a losing war against the toxic magical fog woven by Lady Catherine. Trailing far behind the armoured knights and the lavishly fur-wrapped Queen Bristol was the baggage train where Cheryl Rogers trudged through knee-deep snow, shivering violently beneath a threadbare cloak. Every step was pure agony for the frail kitchen maid. She was burdened with a towering pack of iron cooking pots and heavy rations completely ignored by the royal guards. Yet beneath the coarse wool of her tunic, a profound, undeniable warmth radiated from her collarbone. The jagged, ugly burn scar that Bristol's enforcers had inflicted upon her was rapidly vanishing. In its place, the sacred luminescent golden crescent of the Alpha King's original mark was restoring itself, pulsing with a fiercely protective heat that kept the worst of the northern frostbite at bay. Cheryl kept her chin tucked firmly against her chest, terrified that the golden glow would seep through her collar and betray her miraculous secret to the Queen's ever-watchful spies. Bristol, comfortably seated in her heated carriage, watched her sister's grueling struggle with a twisted, deeply satisfied smile. The Queen had expertly orchestrated this exact scenario. She had quietly instructed Beta Richard to lead the royal procession through the notoriously dangerous Whisper Gorge, a narrow ravine known to harbour starving, clanless rogue wolves. As the treacherous terrain forced the wagons to a grinding halt, demanding that the party navigate a steep, icy incline, on foot Bristol finally sprang her lethal trap. With a subtle prearranged nod from the Queen Lord, Richard ordered the vanguard to push forward at a grueling pace, explicitly leaving the slowest servants behind to secure the rear flank. Gregory Bristol's hulking personal brute forcefully shoved Cheryl off the designated path, sending her tumbling down a steep, snow-covered embankment into a dense, isolated thicket of frozen brambles. Before Cheryl could regain her footing, the hunting party had vanished over the icy ridge, abandoning her completely to the creeping, silent shadows of the northern woods. Silence descended upon the gorge, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant haunting howl of a starving predator. Cheryl scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged white plumes. She desperately abandoned the heavy iron pots, clutching a thick fallen oak branch to defend herself. From the tree line, 3 massive, mangy rogue wolves emerged, their ribs jutting through matted grey fur yellow eyes, fixed ravenously on the solitary, defenseless maid. They fanned out, cornering her against a sheer wall of ice. Cheryl swung the makeshift weapon with all the desperate, fading strength she possessed, striking the lead rogue across its scarred snout. But the beast merely snarled, lunging forward to snap its powerful jaws just inches from her throat. Miles ahead, leading the royal vanguard, Adrian Perry abruptly halted his warhorse. A sudden blinding agony exploded behind his eyes, vastly different from the dull, persistent headaches caused by the Queen's false presence. This was a sharp, visceral tearing sensation, of frantic, deafening psychic alarm bells echoing within his very soul. The magical bindings that had severely clouded his human mind for 6 agonizing months suddenly cracked under the immense, overwhelming pressure of the true mate bond, activating in the face of imminent death. The king let out a guttural, terrifying roar that silenced the entire hunting party. He threw himself from his horse, hitting the snow-packed ground, writhing in agony as his bones violently snapped and reformed. In broad daylight, a phenomenon never before witnessed by his royal court, the king surrendered completely to his inner beast. The colossal pitch-black shadow wolf erupted from Adrian's human form, its red eyes blazing with an apocalyptic fury. Beta Richard shouted orders to restrain the beast, but the shadow wolf moved with supernatural, terrifying velocity. It completely ignored the false queen, shrieking in her carriage, turning instead to sprint back down the treacherous mountain path, tearing through the deep snowbanks as if they were mere mist. The beast was driven by a single agonizing imperative. Its true mate was dying. Back in the frozen gorge, the lead rogue finally overwhelmed Cheryl, knocking the heavy oak branch from her freezing, blistered hands and pinning her firmly into the snow. The beast's foul breath washed over her face as it went for the killing bite. Cheryl squeezed her eyes tightly shut, her glowing collarbone searing with intense, blinding heat as she prepared for the end. Suddenly, a deafening collision of bone and muscle echoed through the silent ravine. The massive shadow wolf slammed into the rogue with the raw, unstoppable force of an avalanche. Adrian's inner beast was a primordial nightmare of tooth and claw, instantly snapping the lead rogue's spine before turning its blinding, wrathful gaze upon the remaining two attackers. The slaughter was swift, brutal, and utterly merciless. Within seconds the snow was painted crimson, and the surviving rogues fled whimpering into the frozen wilderness. The shadow wolf, its chest heaving with exertion and lingering fury, slowly turned its massive head toward Cheryl. She lay trembling in the blood-stained snow, her ragged tunic completely torn at the neckline during the vicious struggle. The heavy fabric was pulled away, leaving her collarbone entirely exposed to the freezing air. There, shining brilliantly against her pale, bruised skin, was the undeniable radiant golden crescent, the Alpha's true mark. The shadow wolf approached with staggering reverence, completely dropping its aggressive posture. It lowered its massive, terrifying snout, gently pressing its wet nose against the glowing mark, a deep, vibrating purr of absolute recognition and profound relief echoing from its chest. As the beast touched the magical seal, the last remaining vestiges of Lady Catherine's dark glamour shattered completely. The toxic veil lifted from Adrian's mind. The massive wolf closed its eyes, and in a swirling, shadowy mist, Adrian Perry shifted back into his human form. Kneeling naked in the freezing snow, Adrian carefully pulled Cheryl into his broad, heavily scarred chest, wrapping his own fur-lined cloak tightly around her shivering body. The king looked down at the woman he had secretly visited in the soot-stained kitchens, the silent maid his wolf had desperately sought every single night. He traced the glowing, restored crescent on her skin with a trembling finger, the horrifying, devastating truth crashing over him like a tidal wave. He had crowned the usurper. He had allowed his true, fated Luna to be tortured, branded, and discarded. "My queen," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with overwhelming grief, lethal rage, and profound reverence. "What have they done to you?" Furious, righteous vengeance is a terrifying thing to behold, but the cold, calculating wrath of a betrayed Alpha King is entirely catastrophic. Adrian carried Cheryl back up the treacherous mountain pass, his jaw set in a rigid, unforgiving line, his eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute clarity. Cheryl rested her head against his steady, beating heart, finally feeling entirely safe, for the first time in her agonizing, miserable life. Back at the royal encampment, the atmosphere was a chaotic, panicked frenzy. Queen Bristol was dramatically weeping into a heavily embroidered handkerchief, successfully convincing Beta Richard and the royal guards that the king had succumbed to total madness and that the frail kitchen maid must have tragically perished in the wilderness. She was in the midst of demanding they return immediately to the stronghold to crown her the sole ruling monarch when the heavy canvas of the command tent was violently ripped open. Adrian strode into the center of the camp, carrying the supposedly dead maid securely in his arms. The sudden suffocating pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the clearing like a physical crushing weight, forcing every single Night Lord and servant to drop to their knees in absolute, terrifying submission. Only Bristol remained standing, her face draining of all color, her lips trembling in sheer, unadulterated panic as she stared at the glowing, undeniable golden mark radiating from her sister's exposed collarbone. "My lord." "Beta." Richard stammered, his forehead pressed firmly to the frozen earth, struggling to breathe under the king's dominating, wrathful presence. We thought you lost." "I was never lost, Richard." Adrian's voice boomed dangerously low and heavily laced with the terrifying dual reverberation of the shadow wolf. I was blinded, drugged and deceived by treasonous usurpers who dared to mock the sacred laws of our ancestors. Adrian gently set Cheryl down on the Alpha's grand high seat, carefully wrapping her in royal furs before turning his lethal burning gaze upon Bristol. The false queen took a terrified, staggering step backward, instinctively clutching her own collarbone where she had carved the fake, crude scar. The king's retribution was swift, absolute, and publicly absolute. The breaking of the glamour. Adrian ordered his royal mages to immediately step forward and examine Bristol. Without the continuous application of Lady Catherine's dark resin, and under the penetrating ancient magic of the true mate bond, the illusion completely crumbled. The scent of wild jasmine vanished, replaced by Bristol's natural sour scent of fear and deceit. The confession of treason, using the irresistible commanding voice of the Alpha Adrian, forced Bristol to publicly confess every horrifying detail of her conspiracy. She wept uncontrollably as she detailed the ambush on the balcony, the cruel dungeon branding the dark magic woven by the exiled elder, and the deliberate assassination attempt orchestrated during this very hunt. The execution of enforcers. Gregory the brutish guard, who had assaulted Cheryl and pushed her into the gorge, was dragged before the king. Adrian did not hesitate. With a single brutal strike of his royal broadsword, he executed the traitor on the spot, ensuring the camp understood the absolute gravity of harming the true queen. The banishment Adrian formally stripped Bristol of her royal titles, her fine silks, and her pack membership. He decreed that she, along with Lord Henry Rogers, who had enabled such a monstrous toxic environment, would be banished to the desolate, unforgiving southern wastes, exiled from the kingdom of Ethelgard, forever stripped of all wealth and status. With the heavy dark rot of treason surgically removed from his camp, the suffocating tension in the frosty air finally evaporated. Adrian turned his back on the sobbing, disgraced Bristol, kneeling humbly before the high seat where Cheryl sat. The entire royal court watched in stunned, awestruck silence as the fearsome, legendary warrior lowered his head in utter devotion to the soot-stained kitchen maid. Cheryl slowly reached out, her heavily calloused, bruised fingers gently tracing the strong line of Adrian's jaw. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. The deep, agonizing trauma of the past 6 months began to slowly wash away, replaced by the warm, healing, undeniable certainty of their fated bond. I vow to spend the rest of my days making amends for my blindness. Adrian spoke softly for her ears alone, though the absolute sincerity in his voice echoed through the camp. You are my heart, my soul, the only true Luna of Ethelgard, if you will still have a fool for a king. Cheryl finally smiled, a bright, genuine expression that seemed to chase the bitter winter chill from the entire clearing. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, entirely accepting the bond. In that very instant, a powerful, magical shockwave rippled through the entire pack. Every wolf present felt the spiritual click of a completed, perfectly aligned hierarchy. The agonizing, restless sorrow that had plagued the kingdom for half a year vanished, entirely replaced by profound, revitalizing strength. King Adrian and Queen Cheryl returned to the great stone stronghold, not as a fractured, dying couple, but as an unstoppable united force. Cheryl, having known the absolute depths of cruelty and suffering, became the most fiercely compassionate and beloved queen the realm had ever known. She completely reformed the servant classes, ensuring no child was ever hidden in the dark, soot-stained kitchens again. And the terrifying, legendary shadow wolf, it never stalked the castle corridors in sorrow again. Instead, it could be found resting peacefully by the grand hearth, its massive dark head resting securely in the gentle lap of the true rightful queen. Did this epic tale of stolen crowns, ancient wolf magic, and the undeniable triumph of true fated mates keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Cheryl rise from the ashes to claim her rightful throne beside the fierce shadow wolf, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic werewolf stories every single week.